the summer of 1812, 45 children died over 14 weeks at the Riverside Children's Home, located 30 miles northwest of Springfield, Illinois. The cause was unknown, and authorities could not identify any natural cause. The home had been operating for nearly 6 years without issue. When investigators arrived, they found the 12 surviving children marked by signs of suffering beyond comprehension. A magistrate's report hidden in county archives for over 2 centuries stated methods employed beyond Christian comprehension. It wasn't until 1987, when renovation workers uncovered documents, that the full horror of the tragedy came to light. Riverside Children's Home had been established in 1806 by the Illinois Territorial Charitable Society as a refuge for orphans. Located near the Sangamon River, it was a sturdy 2-story limestone building that could house up to 60 children. For the first 5 years, the home was known for its efficiency and the care it provided under the leadership of Mrs. Elelena Hartwell, a widow who had lost her own children. Under her guidance, 119 out of 127 children were successfully placed with families, while the others died from natural causes. But after Mrs. Hartwell died in November 1811 during a brutal cold snap, the home's leadership was left in crisis. Enter Josiah Crane, a 42-year-old war veteran who had a reputation for exceptional discipline and commitment. Crane had been wounded twice during military campaigns and was profoundly changed by his experiences in the 1809 Winter Campaign, where his unit was trapped in harsh conditions. Crane believed that hardship was essential to survival and that children should be toughened through exposure to cold hunger and physical labor. He was appointed by the Charitable Society in December 1811 despite minimal investigation into his methods. What they didn't know was that Crane had developed a disturbing theory about childhood development, believing that American children were weak from too much comfort and needed to be exposed to suffering to grow strong enough for survival. When Josiah Crane took control of Riverside Children's Home in December 1811, 47 children ranging from 4 to 15 lived there. Most were true orphans, while others had been abandoned due to the economic hardships following the failed harvests of 1811. Under Mrs. Hartwell's care, the children had been well cared for and comforted after their traumatic losses. But Crane's arrival marked a harsh shift. Crane's first act was to assess the children's fitness in the main hall. The children, still grieving Mrs. Hartwell's death, stood nervously as Crane, a gaunt man with military bearing and physical scars from his service, addressed them. "You have been living as weaklings," he declared, accusing them of being unprepared for the harsh world outside. He divided them into 3 groups based on survival potential. Those under 8 were developing strength, 8-12 were building resilience, and those 13 and older were proving readiness. Crane began his changes by cutting their food portions in half, removing heating from the dormitories, and instituting endurance periods, where the children had to stand motionless in the cold courtyard. Mary Patterson, a 14-year-old, later recalled that they thought Crane was simply testing them, not realizing the severity of the situation. The first death occurred on January 8, 1812, when 6-year-old Thomas Brennan collapsed during a cold tolerance exercise. Despite his illness, Crane insisted Thomas participate. When the boy fell unconscious, Crane initially ordered the others to leave him as a lesson, but Mary defied him and helped the child. Thomas died 3 hours later from hypothermia. Crane, instead of recognizing the death as a consequence of his methods, saw it as proof that his theories were correct. In his log, he wrote, "Death confirms inadequate preparation for frontier survival." That evening, he gathered the children and delivered a terrifying speech, reinforcing his belief in the necessity of their suffering. Crane told the children that Thomas had died because he was unprepared for the harsh realities of adult life. He argued that their sadness and fear were signs of the same weakness that had killed Thomas. Instead of re-evaluating his methods, Crane declared that his training techniques needed to be intensified. "We will not fail the rest of you in the same way," he vowed, announcing that from that day forward, their preparation would increase to ensure they survived what Thomas could not. By now, the children were already weakened by reduced food and constant cold, too scared to understand that what they were experiencing was not training, but systematic abuse. As the winter deepened, Crane's methods became increasingly severe. By February 1812, he had developed a protocol he called the Frontier Readiness Protocol, which subjected the children to escalating physical and psychological stress. His daily logs, written in the precise hand of a military officer, revealed a mind twisted by its own trauma, convinced that cruelty was the key to preparing the children for the harsh frontier life. Phase 1, initiated in December, focused on hunger and temperature tolerance. Children were given a small meal once a day and forced to sleep without blankets, spending extended time outdoors regardless of the weather. Crane documented each child's progress, recording signs of what he saw as mental toughness, fewer complaints, and less crying. In February, Phase 2 began adding labor conditioning to the regimen. Even children as young as 5 were forced to perform hours of manual labor in freezing conditions. Crane believed that work in such adversity built character and strength. The most disturbing part of this phase was what he called isolation strengthening. Children who showed signs of emotional weakness were sent to the root cellar, a cold stone-walled space beneath the building, where they were confined for days with little food or warmth. Emma Caldwell, a 9-year-old, was the first to endure extended isolation after sharing her meager meal with a younger child. She emerged from the cellar frost-bitten, her spirit broken. The second death occurred at the end of February. Martin Kowalski, an 11-year-old boy who had been visibly ill for weeks, collapsed while hauling water from the river. Despite his worsening condition, Crane refused to let him rest, believing that more hardship would strengthen Martin. When Martin finally collapsed and could not be revived, Crane's log entry showed his complete moral blindness. Death resulted from insufficient will to overcome temporary physical discomfort. Protocol must be intensified for remaining subjects. After Martin's death, the older children began to realize the truth. They understood that Crane wasn't preparing them for the hardships of life. He was deliberately killing them with cruelty. The children at Riverside Children's Home were isolated, malnourished, and too weak to resist or escape. The nearest settlement was 30 miles away, across terrain that would be difficult even for healthy adults, let alone starving children in the worst winter in memory. Crane had taken measures to ensure escape was impossible, locking away all warm clothing tools and supplies. Most crucially, he had psychologically conditioned the children to believe their suffering was deserved and that they needed his cruel training to survive. By March 1812, the true extent of Crane's cruelty emerged with the start of Phase 3 fear management training. Based on his military experience, Crane believed children needed to be exposed to terror to develop mental toughness. This phase involved psychological torment, such as locking children in complete darkness for extended periods, forcing them to sleep outside during snowstorms, and subjecting them to sudden loud noises to condition them against panic. The most disturbing aspect was Crane's establishment of a leadership hierarchy. He selected the strongest children to enforce discipline on the younger ones, allowing them to physically punish their peers under his supervision. Samuel Harrison, despite his age and strength, refused to beat younger children, which triggered what Crane called a leadership crisis. Samuel was subjected to brutal isolation and daily beatings until he complied. After a week of this treatment, he returned broken, willing to enforce discipline on the younger children. As Mary Patterson later testified, Samuel became a danger to the others, doing whatever Crane ordered, including punishing those who shared food or helped the sick. By the end of March, 6 more children had died from pneumonia, starvation, injuries from beatings, and hypothermia. However, Crane saw these deaths as proof that his methods were working, believing they weeded out those unfit for survival. As April arrived, bringing slightly warmer weather, the surviving children faced a new phase: advanced survival conditioning. Crane's log entries showed no remorse for the deaths, but instead revealed his conviction that the children who had died were unsuitable for survival. Phase 4 introduced resource competition training, where children were divided into teams and forced to compete for basic necessities like food, water, and shelter. Only the winning teams received adequate food, while losing teams got minimal rations or none at all. Crane believed this would foster competitive instincts and identify natural leaders. This competition drove the children to form secret alliances to share resources and protect the younger ones. Mary Patterson and others created an underground network, defying Crane's system of cruelty. This resistance triggered a rebellion management crisis in Crane's log, indicating the escalating desperation of the children as they fought to survive. Crane's military experience taught him to immediately and completely crush any signs of insurgency to maintain control. To suppress what he saw as resistance, he implemented what he called counterinsurgency protocols. Any child suspected of cooperating with others, regardless of evidence, was severely punished. The most brutal aspect was collective punishment. When one child was suspected of sharing food or helping another, entire groups would be punished with isolation beatings or forced labor. This approach fostered an atmosphere of terror and psychological torture, breaking the children's will to resist. Dr. Margaret Chen, a psychologist who later studied the Riverside documents, compared Crane's methods to those used in prisoner of war camps and cult indoctrination. She observed that Crane systematically broke down the children's sense of identity and morality, forcing them to rely entirely on his authority. The spring deaths began in early April, with 3 children dying in a single week. These deaths showed signs of physical abuse, a shift from the cold and starvation deaths of winter. Rebecca Walsh, 7 years old, died from internal injuries after a beating. Brothers Michael and Patrick O'Brien, aged 8 and 10, died after being forced to fight each other with wooden clubs. But it was the death of Emma Caldwell in late April that marked a turning point. Emma had never fully recovered from her isolation in the cellar and had grown weaker throughout the spring. Crane, seeing her as a symbol of weakness, decided to eliminate her. In his April 22nd log, Crane described Emma's death with chilling detachment. Subject E. Cordwell demonstrates persistent weakness patterns that encourage similar behaviors in other subjects. What he called terminal conditioning was a week-long process of deliberate torture designed to kill Emma while forcing the other children to watch. She was denied food and water, beaten daily, and subjected to extreme fear conditioning, including being locked in a wooden box during freezing nights. The children were forced to watch and warned that any sympathy would lead to the same fate. Emma died on April 29th after 7 days of brutal torture. Mary Patterson later testified, "When Emma died, something broke in all of us. We realized that Mr. Crane wasn't trying to make us strong. He was killing us slowly and making us watch each other die." The horror didn't stop there. Crane's logs from May revealed that he had already planned what he called graduation protocols for the summer. These were designed to determine which children had survived his conditioning and were ready for advanced leadership development. The unsuccessful children, Crane noted, would be subjected to final conditioning, which clearly meant murder. His goal was to reduce the population at Riverside to no more than 12 children by the end of summer. convinced that only a select few had the superior survival genetics necessary for survival. By May 1812, the children at Riverside had come to the terrifying realization that Crane's ultimate goal was not their education, but the systematic elimination of all but a select few, those who met his twisted criteria for survival. These chosen survivors, the strongest and most resilient, would undergo intensive leadership conditioning to prepare them for roles as community leaders in frontier settlements. The remaining children, 31, out of the original 47, were physically and psychologically broken. They resembled nothing like the healthy, hopeful children who had once lived under Mrs. Hartwell's care. Despite their survival, many appeared near death regardless of any further abuse. Crane's daily logs during this period reflected a mind completely disconnected from reality. In a May 5th entry, he wrote, "Subjects show excellent adaptation to resource limitation. Average weight loss of 23 to 31% has eliminated excess body mass while maintaining functional capacity. Reduced emotional responses indicate successful conditioning against unproductive sentiment. Several subjects approaching graduation readiness." What Crane saw as success was the systematic destruction of normal childhood development. The surviving children had learned to suppress all emotions, pain, and needs to avoid triggering Crane's violent responses. They moved like automatons, spoke only when spoken to, and ignored the suffering of others as a survival mechanism. Mary Patterson later described life during this period. "We had stopped being children. We thought only about surviving each day. When someone got sick, we didn't help them, because that would mean punishment for all of us. When someone died, we felt nothing, because feeling anything hurt too much. We had become exactly what Mr. Crane wanted, empty things that could endure anything." The May deaths began with what Crane called endurance testing. These were brutal challenges designed to identify those with exceptional survival capacity. Children were forced to stay submerged in the icy river until they lost consciousness, go without food while performing heavy labor, and endure painful torture tests. 9 children died during these endurance trials. By May 1812, Crane's cruelty had escalated into deliberate murder. Unlike the earlier deaths, which had sometimes been unintended consequences, the deaths in May were calculated. Crane meticulously monitored each child's stress levels and deliberately pushed them to their limits, knowing that once they failed endurance tests, they would be subjected to what he called terminal conditioning, instead of being allowed to recover. The most horrifying development was Crane's decision to begin what he called loyalty confirmation protocols. Concerned that some children still maintained emotional bonds that interfered with their development, Crane decided that the children had to prove their loyalty by participating in the torture and murder of others. Samuel Harrison, broken by his own torture in March, became Crane's primary tool for these protocols. Samuel was tasked with selecting children for advanced conditioning and forcing them to participate in the abuse. Children who refused to partake were marked for death. Dr. Margaret Chen's analysis of Crane's methods revealed that he had created a miniature totalitarian state where children became complicit in their own oppression by being forced to harm each other. This added layer of psychological trauma often proved more damaging than the physical abuse itself. By the end of May, only 22 children remained alive. But Crane had already selected 12 to be eliminated by summer's end, leaving just 10 to enter his so-called advanced leadership conditioning. On June 1st, Crane began his excellence identification protocols, which involved forcing children to compete in brutal challenges where the loser would be killed. The first such competition, held on June 3rd, saw 2 12-year-old boys, James Fletcher and David Murphy, locked in a cellar with a knife. They were told only one would leave alive. David emerged 3 hours later, covered in blood and barely resembling the child he had once been. Mary Patterson later described the transformation. David came out of that cellar. But David didn't come out of that cellar. Something else came out wearing David's body. It would do anything, Mr. Crane asked. It would hurt anyone. It wasn't a child anymore. June 1812 would prove to be the deadliest month in Riverside's history. By the summer solstice, Crane's systematic elimination of children reached its horrific climax. Of the original 47, only 14 remained alive, and Crane's plan was to reduce that number to exactly 10 by the end of summer. In his June 21st log, he declared, "Preliminary conditioning phase concludes today. 14 subjects have demonstrated basic survival capacity." The week following the summer solstice marked the beginning of Crane's final selection protocols, which were designed to identify the children who would be suitable for his so-called advanced leadership development. These were not tests of physical strength or endurance, but calculated assessments of how completely he had shattered the children's moral resistance. Crane's intention was clear. He aimed to determine who was willing to commit murder to survive. The final testing protocols began with resource elimination testing. The 14 remaining children were divided into 7 pairs and told they would each receive enough food for only one person. Locked in separate rooms, they were given 24 hours to decide how to distribute the food. If they failed to reach a decision, both children would undergo terminal conditioning. The psychological torture of forcing starving children to decide who would live and who would die achieved exactly what Crane intended. In 5 of the 7 pairs, one child killed the other for the food. In the remaining 2 pairs, both children died, one pair from mutual starvation as they refused to betray each other, and another from a murder-suicide when an older girl killed a younger boy and then took her own life. By June 23rd, only 9 children remained alive. But Crane had already decided that only 7 of them met his criteria for advanced conditioning. 2 children, 13-year-old Catherine Walsh and 11-year-old Timothy Brooks, had shown what Crane called persistent humanitarian weakness during the resource elimination test. Catherine had survived only because her younger partner Peter had died of starvation instead of fighting her for the food. Timothy had survived because his partner had chosen to commit suicide rather than kill him. In Crane's twisted logic, Catherine and Timothy were too morally weak to lead in his vision of the frontier. As a result, both were marked for elimination, which Crane carried out through what he called public conditioning events. Systematic torture and murder designed to serve as both punishment and education for the other children. Catherine's conditioning was especially brutal. For 4 days she was beaten severely, deprived of food and water, and subjected to psychological torment meant to break her mind before killing her body. The other children were forced to watch, warned that any signs of emotional sympathy would result in similar treatment. Catherine died on June 27th after days of agony. Her final moments were described by Mary Patterson, who recalled, "She couldn't even cry anymore. She just lay there while he beat her, and we had to watch. When she finally died, we felt grateful because her suffering was over. That's what he had done to us, made us grateful when our friends died." Timothy's elimination followed a similar pattern, but with a chilling variation. Instead of simply torturing him to death, Crane forced the remaining children to participate in his murder, pushing them further into the depths of moral degradation. The psychological sadism that Crane exhibited was not just about killing. It was about breaking the children's spirits, forcing them to become accomplices in their own destruction and in the destruction of their peers. The week following the summer solstice marked the culmination of Crane's twisted plan. His final selection protocols were specifically designed to assess how thoroughly he had broken the children's moral resistance. He forced them into participation in the brutal murder of their peers, testing whether they could commit murder to survive, which became the ultimate measure of their leadership in his eyes. Crane's resource elimination testing forced the 14 surviving children into pairs and told them only one could survive by taking the food. Over the course of 24 hours, children were forced to decide who would live and who would die. If the pair failed to make a decision, they both faced death. In 5 of the pairs, one child killed the other to survive. In the other 2, one child died from starvation. And in the final pair, an older girl murdered a younger boy before taking her own life, unable to live with her actions. After this brutal trial, 9 children were left, but Crane had already marked 2 Catherine Walsh and Timothy Brooks for elimination due to what he called humanitarian weakness. Their refusal to harm their partners during the food allocation test sealed their fate. Catherine and Timothy were subjected to public conditioning events where Crane deliberately tortured them in front of the remaining children to break their spirits and show the others what would happen if they exhibited any moral resistance. Catherine endured 4 days of escalating violence, her body beaten and denied food or water. Her slow death, detailed in Mary Patterson's testimony, left the other children numb with gratitude when her suffering finally ended. Timothy's elimination was even more disturbing. Crane forced the remaining children to participate in his murder, turning them into active accomplices in the violence. The psychological damage this inflicted on the children, forcing them to harm one another, achieved Crane's goal of total moral destruction. By June 30th, Timothy was dead, and the surviving 7 children had been transformed into hollowed shells of their former selves. But the horrors didn't end there. Crane's plans for expansion revealed an even more terrifying vision. His logs indicated that Riverside was only the beginning. His conditioning methods were designed to be applied to other charitable institutions across the Illinois Territory, and eventually to entire frontier communities. He believed he had discovered a way to create superior human beings through systematic violence and trauma. On July 1st, Crane's log entry declared final selection phase successfully completed. 7 subjects have demonstrated complete conditioning success. Subjects show total compliance with authority, absence of unproductive emotional responses, and willingness to eliminate inferior specimens when directed. Crane's plan was now ready to be expanded. He intended to use the surviving children as instruments to carry his horrifying methods to other institutions. But the children's ordeal came to a head on July 15th. When Crane informed them they would travel to Springfield to demonstrate his methods to the territorial authorities. 3 of the children would be used as examples of the success of the program, while the remaining 4 would be publicly executed to show the effectiveness of his elimination protocols. This was the final step in Crane's plan to have his methods adopted by the authorities, ensuring that hundreds more children would suffer the same fate. Mary Patterson, who had survived through resilience and cunning, realized that Crane's plan would likely result in the deaths of all 7 remaining children. She understood that if Crane succeeded in convincing the authorities, more children would be subjected to the same horrors. Despite the brutal conditioning she had endured, Mary retained enough of her moral clarity to act. On the night of July 16th, she made a daring escape. Slipping out of the locked dormitory, Mary navigated her way to Crane's office, determined to steal his detailed logs and expose the truth. She knew her chances of survival were slim, 30 miles across hostile territory. But she understood that remaining at Riverside meant certain death for herself and the other children. Inside Crane's office, Mary discovered more than she had imagined. The logs detailed not only the murder of 40 children, but also Crane's plans to expand his protocols to other institutions with detailed recommendations for territorial authorities on how to eliminate unsuitable children and train the survivors. His correspondence written in code indicated that Crane was part of a network of like-minded individuals, including officials from other institutions who believed that trauma and violence were necessary for preparing children for frontier life. Mary's escape was short-lived. When Crane discovered her missing, he immediately searched the building and found her in his office trying to steal the papers. His response was swift and brutal. Mary was subjected to emergency conditioning, a night of intense torture meant to extract any information about possible accomplices. But there were no accomplices. Mary had acted alone, and despite Crane's attempts to break her, she revealed nothing. Crane's paranoia intensified after Mary Patterson's escape attempt. His belief that she had sabotaged his work led him to conclude that his conditioning had failed. On July 17th, he made a chilling decision to implement total reconditioning for all the remaining children. His log entry read, "Subject M. Patterson's attempted sabotage indicates fundamental conditioning failure across all remaining subjects. Will implement complete reconditioning beginning immediately. All subjects will undergo terminal conditioning, and replacement subjects will be acquired for proper program implementation." This decision marked the beginning of the most horrific period at Riverside. Mary's resistance sparked the first organized rebellion among the surviving children. Samuel Harrison, who had been psychologically broken and forced to participate in months of torture, experienced a moral awakening when he witnessed Mary's abuse. On the morning of July 18th, as Crane prepared to begin reconditioning, Samuel made a desperate move. Armed with a stolen knife, he attacked Crane while the superintendent was preparing instruments for Mary's torture. Though the attack failed, it caused enough chaos for Mary and two other children, Lucy Chen and Robert Adams, to escape the main building. Samuel Harrison died in the attack, but his sacrifice gave the remaining children a chance to flee. Despite being severely injured from her torture, Mary managed to reach the main road with Lucy and Robert. The three were discovered by a territorial militia patrol the next day and taken to Springfield. Mary's testimony led to an immediate investigation into Riverside Children's Home. When authorities arrived at Riverside on July 22nd, they found Crane calmly completing his final log entry in his office. The four remaining children, who had been unable to escape during Samuel's diversionary attack, were dead killed in what Crane described as accelerated terminal conditioning. Crane offered no resistance to arrest and seemed genuinely confused by the authorities' response to his actions. He insisted that he had been preparing the children for frontier survival and that his methods would be recognized as necessary once authorities understood his approach. The investigation revealed the full scope of Crane's horrors. Between December 1811 and July 1812, 45 children had died not from disease or natural causes, but through systematic torture and murder. Further investigation uncovered Crane's correspondence with other individuals interested in similar methods, exposing a broader network of frontier institutions where child abuse was masked as preparation for life in the wilderness. Crane was executed in August 1812. But the damage he caused went far beyond the children he murdered. The three surviving children, Mary, Lucy, and Robert, were left deeply traumatized, requiring years of care before they could reintegrate into society. Mary Patterson's testimony, preserved in territorial archives, was pivotal in convicting Crane and unraveling the network of abuse. The Riverside Children's Home was permanently closed, and the building was demolished in 1847. However, the documents discovered during renovations in 1987 revealed that the property had been abandoned for decades before its demolition. Local residents reported strange sounds and unexplained phenomena emanating from the site, creating an eerie atmosphere that kept them away. Whether these reports were the result of genuine supernatural activity, or simply the psychological impact of the horrific events that transpired there, remains unclear. But the site stood empty for over 30 years after Crane's execution. The investigation sparked by Mary Patterson's testimony led to reforms in the oversight of charitable institutions. New inspection protocols were established to prevent similar abuses from occurring in the future, ensuring that such a tragedy would never happen again. The network of individuals, inspired by Crane's methods, was never fully exposed, and historians have documented similar cases of systematic abuse at frontier institutions well into the 1840s. The psychological impact of the Riverside horror extended beyond its immediate victims, profoundly affecting public trust in charitable institutions. This erosion of trust led to a greater reliance on family-based care and apprenticeship systems, which often left orphan-funded children with fewer protections than they had under institutional care. Dr. Margaret Chen's modern analysis of the Riverside documents concluded that Crane's abuse represented one of the earliest documented instances of institutional child torture driven by ideological motives rather than personal sadism. Dr. Chen argued that Crane was not a sadist in the traditional sense, but rather an ideological terrorist, using children as subjects in a twisted experiment aimed at creating superior human beings through trauma. The systematic nature of his abuse, combined with his meticulous documentation, suggested that Crane viewed his actions as scientific research rather than crimes. The most disturbing finding, according to Dr. Chen, was the evidence that Crane's methods were being studied and potentially implemented by others during the same period. The correspondence found in his office pointed to a network of frontier educators and institutional administrators who believed that systematic trauma was necessary for proper child development. Though much of this network was never fully investigated due to limited law enforcement resources, evidence suggests that similar abuses took place in at least 4 other territories. Crane's final log entry, written on the morning of his arrest, offers chilling insight into his mindset. It read, "Program implementation concludes today with arrival of territorial representatives. 45 subjects successfully eliminated for insufficient survival capacity. 7 subjects achieved basic conditioning requirements. 3 subjects demonstrated advanced survival capacity and will provide foundation for expanded program implementation. Results confirm effectiveness of systematic conditioning protocols for frontier readiness development." Even as he faced execution, Crane showed no remorse and continued to believe that his methods were justified. His final statement to the authorities was a request for his research to be studied and implemented at other institutions, convinced that his approach had proven necessary for child development in frontier environments. This story serves as a chilling reminder of how institutional authority can become a shield for systematic evil, and how the isolation of frontier life allowed such horrors to persist unchecked for months, if not years. The children who died at Riverside were not victims of disease or accident. They were murdered by a system that prioritized ideology over humanity and authority over compassion. Do you think everything about this story has been revealed? What do you think happened to the network of individuals who shared Crane's beliefs? Leave your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark, mysterious stories, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves uncovering terrifying truths. The darkness of American history still holds many secrets waiting to be revealed, and will continue shedding light on them, one unsettling truth at a time. See you in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.